But now it's time to meet Albie Amankona, political commentator and founder of Conservatives Against Racism, who has a plethora of news. Good morning.
Good morning, David. How are you?
I'm very well indeed. Actually, I've been gripped. I've been here all week, actually, so I've been watching the unfolding drama as it happened.
And what a week in politics it has been.
It really has, actually. And I think it was, I've lost track of the days, but I think it was on Tuesday where we obviously saw that bombshell in the morning from Lord Macdonald. And then, of course, everything happened. Those two resignations then followed. And literally, we were here watching the count of the number of MPs who were resigning or ministers who were resigning. And, of course, a tumultuous week.
It's been a tumultuous week for the Prime Minister. I know lots of people. I was in a TV studio earlier this week, and one of the other guests remarked that we should take a shot every time a minister resigned. But I suggested that maybe if that happened, we'd be, you know, too drunk to go on television and talk about it. I think by that point it was almost 50. But no, I mean, last Sunday, of course, Boris Johnson was still the Prime Minister, still in a lot of trouble, of course, lots of scandal attached to him. And this week, it's the beginning of a leadership election, and there are numerous Conservative MPs trying to be the next leader of the Conservative Party.
How many have we got now?
Oh, I think it's definitely over 10, something like that.
Yeah, I've got 10, but I think that is so far.
I think 10 so far, and then I'm expecting there'll be other people to announce it. People like Liz Truss, people like Penny Mordaunt, and so on and so forth will be, I would say, announcing this week, although some people are saying that perhaps it's getting a bit late to start launching a leadership contest now. Rishi Sunak was first out the rafters, wasn't he? Was very slick.
Okay, so quickly, that video, there is no way he made that in one day.
Oh, no, absolutely not. That video, I expect, has been in the works for a while. I'm sure there are several of them.
Well, the website was incorporated a year ago.
I think it was in December, something like that. Look, Boris Johnson started his leadership campaign before the leadership campaign back in 2018. He had been campaigning for it since Brexit, since before then. So I think a lot of this commentary that Rishi Sunak's been preparing for a long time is actually a little bit unfair, because all major leadership contenders will start their campaigns whilst the other Prime Minister is still in power.
Shouldn't he have been concentrating on being Chancellor and actually helping people instead of actually plotting a race to become PM?
Yes, I think that's a fair point, but David, you and I both know how politics works. Boris Johnson was campaigning to be leader the whole time Theresa May was Prime Minister. Boris Johnson was also campaigning to be Prime Minister when David Cameron was Prime Minister. This is just how politics works. Things don't just happen in the click of a button. Leadership campaigns take a lot of preparation. People need to field support before to make sure they feel they're going to get a chance to win the leadership.
So just talk us through. So if you put your name forward, you obviously have to have a number of signatures, don't you?
Yes, so I think at the moment the number of signatures you have to have is 8. I think the rules actually might change tomorrow. I'm hearing some rumours that they might whack it up to 15 or 20 or 25
because the 1922 committee meeting.
Yes, because the number of candidates is so high that they want to whittle it down as quickly as possible. And of course, we have to get to the final 2 before the summer recess, and Parliament rises for recess on the 21st of August.
Which is like
21st of July, rather, which is in 10 or so days. And then it will go out to the membership, and we'll vote on who the next leader of the party is, probably sometime towards the end of August, beginning of September. We'll
Do you not think
this
is very protracted? Couldn't they get a move on? I mean, haven't they noticed there is a cost of living crisis? The fact is we have a war in Ukraine. Why does it take so long?
Well, David, this is actually sped up. So some people are saying what could happen is that when it gets to the final 2, they could perhaps ditch the regional hustings, for example, which tend to take a lot of time. The candidates have to go around the country, appeal to members in all 4 corners of the United Kingdom, etc. And that tends to favour the lesser well-known candidates. So let's say it is Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak who are in the final 2. It would favour Suella for those regional hustings to go ahead, because generally speaking, it just helps them to get to know the membership a little bit better. So what's being said is that could essentially be taken out of the process, but it would require both candidates to agree to that to happen.
Right.
And I think it's unlikely that a less well-known candidate would agree to that.
And who do you fancy in this race?
Who do I fancy in this race? I mean, I think it's one of the things which I've been really struck by is the talent which are putting themselves forward in this leadership election.
You think there's a lot?
On all sides of the party. No, I do. I really do think there is a lot. You know, you've got some sort of left-field candidates, new candidates like Kemi Badenoch, very talented Minister for Equalities. I think she's also got a position in the Treasury. I think she did very well on her equalities brief, especially with the Race Relations Report, the Sewell Report and the Inclusive Britain Strategy, which came out earlier on this year. So she's definitely one to watch, maybe one more on the political right. Then Rishi Sunak, I know everyone loves to hate Rishi Sunak, but he is going to be a big candidate.
Well, he's not a Tory, is he?
Well, you can argue that point if you like, David, but he has had some very difficult circumstances to deal with, and some would argue that he's dealt with them well, others would argue that he's dealt with them badly.
Okay.
Then you've got people, you know, the Remainers like Jeremy Hunt, Tom Tugendhat, and the more One Nation wing of the Conservative Party. Liz Truss, who's actually been a cabinet minister since 2014.
Has she?
Yeah, she's been a cabinet minister since Cameron's government, so she's been the longest-serving cabinet minister. It's her first time running for the leadership after it being rumoured, I think, in every other race recently. So there are lots of runners and riders, and honestly, I can say hand on heart, I have not decided who I'm going to vote for yet, and I think I'm looking forward to seeing what they're going to pitch to the membership.
I think I was sad Ben Wallace stood down.
Were you? I think a lot of people were surprised that Ben Wallace stood down, because actually, when you looked at the Conservative Home polling for who was the most popular leader, potential leader, Ben Wallace was at the top periodically, weeks on end. So I think a lot of people were surprised that Ben Wallace stood down. From what I understand, he had been fielding how much support he had from backbench MPs and came to the decision that there was no point in him standing, a similar decision that Steve Baker came to.
Now, of course, the intrigue is scandals that are underlying any of these. There's a lot of talk in the newspapers this morning about some of them may have things, skeletons in their cupboards.
Yes, absolutely. So there was a story in the Times which speaks about potential skeletons in the cupboards. I know that there's been a lot of attention put onto Nadeem Zahawi's funds and his tax affairs. And his offshore. And, you know, he's a very wealthy man, just like Rishi Sunak, and there's a lot that people can look into.
OK. I have to make you hold that point just for the moment.
I'm holding it.
Good. Albie, thank you very much indeed. Renée, thank you very much indeed. We'll continue our conversation about the runners and riders and what's going to happen with the Conservative Party after this break. This is TalkTV. Welcome back to Weekend Breakfast with me, David Bull. I've got two very chatty people over here. I've got Albie Amankona and also Dr. Renée Hoenderkamp. Shall I break into this little chat? What's going on? Anyway, very good to see you both. Thank you very much indeed. Right. Do you want to say to people what you said to me in the break, which I thought is very interesting, about the policy direction of many of these contenders? You know, what are your thoughts on that?
So my thoughts on the policy direction, as I look down at the Sunday Telegraph here, I'm reading Javid and Hunt call for massive cuts to taxation. And I thought to myself, that sounds quite similar to something else I've heard.
And what is
from someone in politics who I'm sat with right next to me here, and that is Dr. David Bull, because of course, who are the people who've been calling for tax cuts consistently, whilst no one else has really been calling for them? It's the Reform Party. And now we have pretty much all of the leadership runners and riders talking about tax cuts, whether or not it's business rates holidays for 5 years, whether or not it is bringing forward the income tax cut to next year, whether or not it's scrapping the corporation tax hike, reversing the national insurance hike. All of these tax-cutting policies that I have heard the good men and women of Reform speaking about for a long time. It seems like the Conservative Party leadership runners and riders, everyone really apart from Rishi Sunak, and I think he might change his position on that, are talking.
I mean, it was very funny. I do
cuts.
feel slightly vindicated, and we have been saying it for a long time. Richard Tice phoned me last night to say they've nicked our manifesto, pretty much all of them. But you're right, Rishi Sunak hasn't done that. Renée, for you, these runners and riders, how does it sort of how do you comprehend them in your head?
So for me, I want somebody who is going to actually take the country forward and allow us to be free. That's my first and foremost thing. I want somebody who actually can trust us as adults and allow us to be adults.
So
and make
no
our
more
own
lockdowns, no more masks.
No more masks, no more lockdowns. Let us make our own risk decisions. After that, I want to make sure that Brexit is done absolutely properly. I think it's really important. And as a woman, I want someone who's going to stand up and say, women are women, and men are men, and trans women and trans men, absolutely fine, we support you, but you're in your own category. You're not going to erase women. And that's what I want from a candidate. But I also want to see tax cuts, because I've never understood from the moment we went into this cost of living crisis why we were increasing taxes, an increase in interest rates, that's not going to get the economy moving. It's not going to help people out of this massive hole that we are facing. And 400 quid here and 400 quid there and 5 pence off a litre of petrol is not going to touch the sides.
No, and I think there are many other problems, including energy, for example, the price of fuel. The fact is people cannot afford to get to work, and we've been saying all week that, you know, the amount of money is something like £1,500 a month to fill up your car. That's unsustainable. Now, just coming back to you, Albie, in terms of that, given that you're hearing obviously one voter, but a very important voter nevertheless, Rishi Sunak for me is out. He is a high tax, high regulation, low growth chancellor, or was.
I would not write Rishi Sunak off simply because he may become that juggernaut candidate that lots of members of parliament get behind in the first place. It doesn't necessarily mean he will win when it's put to the final two in the membership, but nonetheless, I think he could get far in this leadership race because he's a very popular figure within the Conservative Party. Well, at least in the parliamentary party, maybe less so in the membership. He is someone who appeals both to the more Brexit wing of the party, the more One Nation wing of the party, and actually, you know, a lot of us were singing his praises throughout most of the pandemic when he was handing out that money. I had very few complaints from anyone or from any media stations when that was going on, but now we're having to pay for it. He's trying to sort of position himself as the candidate who's not going to be telling any fairy tales, which has irritated some Conservative MPs like David Davis, for example.
Yes, absolutely. And what about Penny Mordaunt?
Penny Mordaunt's an interesting one. I, from the outset, have been watching Penny Mordaunt for a while. She released an excellent book called Greater Britain, for her vision for Britain after Brexit, which I thought was a brilliant book. She's got some great ideas in there about how we can reform the way that politics is done, reform the House of Lords, spread democracy around the world, you know, be a smaller state, smaller state, less taxation type of reformed economy. Post-Brexit, really taking it forward. But she has not announced that she's running for the leadership yet, and I'm just wondering what Penny is waiting for, because I'd really like to see her campaign.
Yeah, I think many people would, actually. But for me, I think the person that should get this should be a Brexiteer, committed Brexiteer, who actually gets Brexit done, 100%. Which we still haven't got Brexit done. And secondly, they need to be someone who believes in low tax and actually the autonomy of the British people. Yeah. We're sick and tired of being told what to do by a bunch of people that we didn't even think they knew what they were doing.
Who seem to have no connection to real lives.
Yeah.
No connection at all. So
or no life experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And so they don't know how we're really living and how these things affect us.
I definitely want to see lower taxes, but one of the things that we have to think about when we're talking about lower taxes, and you actually, in Reform, you say you're going to borrow to cut taxes. Are the government going to borrow to cut taxes? Are they going to cut public services to cut taxes? We've got to have a realistic conversation about how these tax cuts are going to be funded. You did that very well with Reform. I've not heard that from any of the leadership runners and riders just yet.
OK, well, thank you very much for that compliment. Let's move on now to what Boris Johnson will do next. I read yesterday he was going to stand again, but I believe that that is not possible. But clearly he is, and I keep using this word about Boris Johnson, he's an entertainer, he's a performer. As Mayor of London, I thought he did a great job, because the job is to sell, but he's not the chief executive, is he?
No, precisely. Well, I think the story of what Boris Johnson is going to next is going to be an interesting one. You're right about that. That story about him standing down to rerun turned out to be total nonsense, because it's not within the Conservative Party rules. But on to what he'll do next. I think the world is honestly his oyster. I'm certainly going to buy his memoir when it comes out. I'm sure both of you will as well, and a lot of the listeners and watchers will as well. Could earn hundreds of thousands of pounds on the speaker circuit, millions even, become more of a big television star. I'd like to see maybe he might get a show on TalkTV.
Well, he may well indeed.
Maybe he'll be one of your colleagues.
He won't need to look to wealthy donors to, decorate his next house, will he?
No, exactly right. And of course the wedding, which was going to be at Chequers, that's no longer at Chequers, is it?
No, so I thought that was an odd story. I didn't get too bothered about that, to be honest. Did you find it to be somewhat sleazy?
No, it wasn't the sleazy thing. It was just the fact that we thought the Prime Minister was there and wanted to stay on until September because his wedding's in 3 weeks at the Grace and Favour mansion that is Chequers, and of course that's run as an independent trust. I didn't really have an issue with it.
I don't think it's sleaze, but I think what it does all the time is it belittles politics. That the thing that Boris is worried about is where he's going to have his wedding party.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, you see, the big elephant in the room here is Carrie. Because I wonder if Carrie hadn't been on the scene, whether Boris would have got himself into so much hot water.
I'm not sure of that. I think that certainly at least within the party, on the political side of things, some people look to Carrie as the person that is sort of persuaded Boris to go with a lot of the green agenda and maybe some more of the LGBT rights issues that she's been championing. I actually think quite well within the party. There is a place for that kind of conservatism in the Conservative Party. There are some people on the right who don't like it, so from a political perspective I can see it, but in terms of his general character, do I think he would have been a different Prime Minister if he was married to Carrie or not married to Carrie? Well, he has been this way in his entire political life when he was with Marina and when he's with Carrie, so I think it's the man, not the wife.
And also, just going through all those candidates, how many of them do you think will be strong enough to say ditch net zero?
None of them.
None of them.
Yeah.
But you see, but the TalkTV viewers think it's a nonsense. They think we should ditch it.
But David, net zero was in the manifesto, so any TalkTV viewer that voted for Boris Johnson in 2019 voted for net zero.
It was in the manifesto. So therefore, by decree, that means they will therefore not vote Conservative at the next election if it remains in that manifesto.
I think that remains to be seen. It is actually also, broadly speaking, when we look at the polling, it is a policy that polls well consistently across the United Kingdom. We've not yet had that debate around what the practical steps we will need to take to get to net zero are, which I think could change that dynamic, and I think that's how that could change. But ultimately, when people talk about, oh, we need to get rid of all of this green, insert expletive here, it's too early for me to say it, it does irritate me a little bit, because if you voted for Boris Johnson in 2019, that is what you voted for. He spoke about it all the time.
Yes, but there's
just as much as not raising national insurance, just as much as all of these other manifesto pledges we went back on. And I often say he shouldn't be going back on his manifesto pledges, and I would argue the same for this one.
But there is almost nobody to vote for that doesn't have this net zero, if you think about everybody. So there is no choice. So in the end, you end up picking a manifesto that mainly suits what you want to vote for.
The least worst.
The least worst. And we only need to look around the world now at the Dutch farmers who have been told to kill their cattle for net zero, who are now protesting in the streets. You know, this isn't just a problem that we have. And around the world, people are saying, no, I can't stomach the cost of this. Forget the science or the lack of science. Just the cost of it to the everyday person is unacceptable.
I think the practical steps which need to be taken to meet net zero by 2050 or some other year are yet to be laid out, and we can have a debate about what those steps would be that we need to take. But I think the general principle that we should look to live in a more environmentally friendly way and not be so wasteful with our resources is actually a Conservative principle, David.
Absolutely,
and it's one that I'm very proud of.
It's also about the timeline, however.
The timeline, which I said, or some year other than 2050.
Thank you so much for coming in, Albie. It's been a great pleasure to see you.